Peace, love, and blessings, fam. Johnny Sally here with day 36 of Wisdom of the Ages by Wayne W. Dyer. If you missed the previous recordings, you can catch them on YouTube at Loyalty Life, spelled Lyfe LLC. Let's get into day 36, Fear and Risk Taking. I envy not in any moods. I envy not in any moods the captive void of novel rage, the linen born within the cage that never knew the summer woods. I envy not the beast that takes his license in the field of time, unfettered by the sense of crime, to whom a conscience never wakes, nor what may count itself as blessed, the heart that never plighted troth, but stagnates in the weeds of sloth, nor any want begotten rest. I hold it true whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost, than never to have loved at all. Alfred Lord Tennyson, an English poet who was appointed Poet Laureate in 1850, Alfred Lord Tennyson is considered highly representative of the Victorian age in England. Alfred Tennyson was the chief representative of what is known as the age of Victorian poetry. Yet, no poet that I've ever read about could be less Victorian. He was hopelessly addicted to tobacco and port. He was a wanderer, and he remained largely unsettled throughout his life. The poet Thomas Carlyle described him in a letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson as a man sultry and sad in an element of gloom, one of the finest looking men in the world. His voice is mightily loose, fit for loud laughter and piercing wail. From all that I have read of Alfred Tennyson, he was a deeply passionate man who loved to take risks and was willing to take the consequences when his investments or his pursuits did not turn out as planned. In this selection, the poet sends us a message that is all too often ignored by those who live in fear of failing. He tells us to go in life. He tells us to go on in life as if failure were not a consideration and ignore our fears as we proceed. He does not envy the songbird who remains safely ensconced in a cage. Freedom is what he values, despite the inherent risks. He does not envy those who, fearing the risk of partnership in marriage, choose the safety of non-commitment. The last 4 lines of this poem are among the most memorable and oft-quoted in all literature, yet they are also perhaps the most unheeded. I hold it true whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I second this notion and remind you that Tennyson is not just writing about love relationships. He could just as easily have written, "'Tis better to have acted and fallen than never to have acted at all." I suggest you consider a radical idea. There is no such thing as failure. Failing is a judgment that we humans place on a given action rather than judgment substitute the action. You cannot fail, you can only produce results. Then the most important question to ask yourself is, what do you do with the results you produce? Suppose, for example, that you want to learn to hit a baseball or to bake a cake. You set up the plate and you dribble the ball off your bat after several misses. In the case of your baking, your cake comes out of the oven and collapses in a pile of crumbs before your eyes. In truth, you have not failed. You have acted and you have produced a result. Now, what do you do with the results you produced? Do you label yourself a failure? Announce that you are uncoordinated and untalented in the kitchen and mope about your genetic deficiencies? Or do you step back up to the plate or back into the kitchen and learn from the results you have produced. This is what Tennyson is asking you to understand and apply in your life in all areas of pursuit. In relationships, you have not failed if you have been through breakups or divorce court. You have produced the result. It is better to jump in and experience life than to stand on the sidelines fearing that something might go wrong. Consider for a moment what your very nature is like. As an infant, before you ever had any opportunity to be subjected to the conditioning that leads you away from risk for fear of failing, your nature was programmed to learn how to walk. For a while, you just lay down. Then your nature said, sit, and you did. Then your nature commanded, crawl, and you obeyed. Eventually, your nature said, stand up on 2 feet, balance yourself, and move from an upright position, and you listened. The first time you made the effort, you fell down and returned to crawl. But your nature wouldn't let you stay satisfied with crawling, and you ignored your fears and the results you had produced and stood up again. This time to a wobble, and then another fall. Imagine if you had succeeded in overcoming, my apologies, eventually your nature won out and you walked. Imagine if you had succeeded in overcoming your natural programming. You would still be crawling on all fours and not knowing the adventures of an upright life. And so it is with everything in your life. It is far better to have acted and produced results that you will grow from than to ignore your nature and live in fear. The word fear can be thought of as an acronym that translates to false evidence appearing real. In other words, we look at what we imagine to be a strong reason for inaction, and then we allow it to become our reality, even before we make an attempt. Our fear is supported by an illusion that it is possible to fail, and that failure means we are worthless. Another acronym for fear is forget everything and run. This is the flight mentality in the face of the prospect of failing. This is not what Tennyson is promoting. Alfred Tennyson was elevated to the peerage 8 years before his death, and he became the national poet of England in his latter years. But the younger Alfred Tennyson was a man who pursued his interests in vigor, was willing to make mistakes, and was most anxious to love. Even knowing that losing was a probability, he preferred that to never having loved. He did indeed experience rejection and sorrow, but as he says so poignantly, I envy not in any moods. Know in your heart that you have never failed at anything and you never will. The artificial judgments of failure only keep you from erring or making a mistake. Yet those mistakes and errors are the very stuff of growth. I've always enjoyed Thomas Edison's response to a reporter who asked him how it felt to have failed 25,000 times in his effort to invent a battery. Failed? Replied Edison. I haven't failed. Today, I know 25,000 ways not to make a battery. Put the lesson of Tennyson's classic poem to work in your life with the following suggestions. 1. Refuse to ever use the term failure again about yourself or anyone else. Remind yourself that when things didn't go as planned, you didn't fail, you only produced a result. Then ask yourself this powerfully life-enhancing question. What am I going to do with the results I've produced? And proceed to act in such a way as to be grateful rather than resentful for those less than glorious results. 3. When others use the term failure about you, gently correct them by saying, I have not failed. Today, I know another way not to bake a cake. 4. Deliberately pursue activities in which you have previously shown little or no aptitude. The way out of fear or a failure is to face it and laugh at the results rather than be embarrassed or intimidated by earlier outcomes. Hmm. So, how many of y'all watching this right now are ready and able to shift your consciousness from saying failure, from judging yourself to having failed or anyone else? Me and some of my friends talk a lot about how the English language has programmed us to stay in many lower vibrational states. And I talk about how the words we use, most people don't fully understand the meaning of those words. They know how they feel a word is supposed to be used based off how they felt when the word was used. So, tie that into not accomplishing a task. You feel like a failure because your ego tells you you didn't do it right or you didn't complete it. So now you identify a lesson or learning how not to do something or the result produced by an action. You see that as failure. That's some pretty heavy stuff. The mind is a very, very, very powerful thing. And we have to begin to learn to override these thought distortions. Because just because you think something is a certain way doesn't mean it has to be. Now, the other side of that sphere is, in many cases, if you think it is that way, it will be. Unless there's a natural law that diametrically opposes the way you perceive or think about something, it's going to manifest in that regard. But it's wild to me how many times we won't invest the same energy of expanding on results produced in ourselves as we do in other people. We're more lenient with other people who we watch produce results and try again and again and again. We're more inclined to run back to a relationship that has failed over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Even, and I mean that in the truest sense of it being a relationship attempted. Situationships are what they are, and usually in those cases, one or both individuals sees something one way, the other doesn't. It's a whole myriad of things. But even that itself is not a failure. You have just produced different results. Maybe there's some timeline where the results produced would actually align and each partner would say, oh wow, previously I did this when I could have done this and things would have been different all along. But back to ourselves. We are more inclined to be less judgmental in watching somebody else. With ourselves, some of us may take that first bump and not want to go back into it. But I know and feel in my heart that majority of us will continue to try something because we're either passionate about it or we really want to see it come to fruition. So let's break away from both of those mentalities because they are rooted in fear. Forget everything and run. It is a horrible thing unless you go say forget everything and run and jump right into the risk that you are wanting to take. And what was the other one? False evidence appearing real. You don't have to fear anything in life because you are the greatest thing you have standing behind you. You are the greatest thing you have standing with you. So don't be afraid anymore. Choose to take logical risk and investments. And if you don't necessarily achieve what you accomplished initially, know that you just learned a different way not to do something. and you've become a better person at the same time. And that's the full goal of life. So, I thank you for being here, more so for yourself than for me. I ask that you walk in love, walk in light, walk in peace, stop being afraid, and walk in love. And know that you are